a minute or two. Okay.
I think you can get started, Tracy.
Yeah.
I'll let people in. Great.
It's just gone 2 o'clock, so let's get started. Just first of all, a very warm welcome to all of our alumni. As you know, we kicked off our alumni network last year with in-person events. We then followed up with a survey, and what we gathered from that survey is that many of you would like to hear from some of our HFO winners to learn more about how one would navigate one's career in research, in academia, and just to hear from some of these remarkable women that are sitting here before me. So on that note, I would like to introduce to you Professor Valerie Mizrahi from the Wits University. Valerie Mizrahi, who's the director. Sorry, got you mixed up there for a minute. Professor Valerie Mizrahi, Director of Molecular Microbacteriology Research Unit at the University of Cape Town. And then Professor Lynn Morris, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation at the University of Wits. And as you know, we provide scholarships for masters, PhDs, postdocs, sabbaticals. We recently launched our New Frontiers Award for early to mid-career researchers. But really, the penultimate award to win at the Oppenheimer Memorial Trust is the Harry Oppenheimer Fellowship Award. It's an incredibly prestigious award, and really it's known on the continent as very similar to the Nobel Prize. So to say that both Lynn and Valerie have won this award really tells you the caliber of researchers that we have. The award is given to people that are doing cutting edge, globally relevant research that are at the height of their career and really are known globally. So it's a huge privilege to be able to have both of you here today and just to hear in conversation style a little bit more about your journeys. And, I think it is quite daunting when you're doing your PhD and you're starting to toy with, should I go on to do a postdoc? Is this, a career that I want to pursue? I think it's always helpful to hear from people that have really walked the journey. So I'm going to kickstart with Valerie. And I'm just curious to know at the very beginning, what sparked in you this idea that you wanted to be a researcher? Were there some role models along the way that influenced you? And as you went onto this journey, can you tell us about some of the highlights and a little bit more about your journey and how you got to be a researcher?
Okay, so thanks, Tracy. I hope you can hear me okay. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be part of this. So thanks for the invitation, especially to be sharing this today with Lynn, who we've known each other for many years, and I'm a huge admirer of everything Lynn has achieved. I got interested in science in high school, actually. I mean, I had a fantastic chemistry teacher. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and my teacher actually had a PhD. both my physics and my chemistry teachers, and I just fell in love with chemistry. I landed up doing my PhD in chemistry at UCT, postdoc overseas, and I really want to emphasize the importance of the kinds of people that one interacts with, that you have the luck and privilege of interacting with. And my PhD advisor, the late Tom Modrow, encouraged me to think beyond the world of chemistry into the world of biology. This was really at the time in the early 1980s when molecular biology was essentially in its infancy. And he forced me out of my comfort zone. And it seems to me that a lot of what I've done during my career has been constantly, and I wonder if there's a special kind of psychological quirk, to keep moving myself out of comfort zone. So I went overseas, spent a good few years in the US, where I learned molecular biology and biochemistry, and literally traveled overseas with a textbook called Biochemistry, a classic textbook. I had studied maths and chemistry at UCT, no biology background. And then I came back to South Africa and became interested in the problem pretty much of HIV, and then moved from HIV into tuberculosis. So I've transitioned many different disciplines in my career. And what's motivated me actually are the things that turn out to be interesting to me. I became very interested in certain aspects of biology, particularly how nucleic acids, DNA in particular, maintains its integrity, and particularly important in the context of an organism such as Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the TB bacillus. When I came back to South Africa, I was really, you talk about role models, I was inspired throughout my studies at UCT, and when I came back to start my own lab in 1989, I was inspired by Wieland Gierwes, who very distinguished. And Tracy, I know that you know him very well. He's done a lot of work. In fact, he interviewed me when I won the Harry Oppenheimer Fellowship. He has just published a book called The Meaning of a Life, a South African Scientist's Tale. And I would strongly encourage everybody who's on this call to read this, because if you're interested in the life of an academic, this is the book. Why do I want to highlight Wieland? He was a senior deputy vice chancellor at UCT, but he epitomized things that I aspired to. He was an outstanding biomedical scientist. He was interested in mechanisms, how things worked, not just simply documenting what he observed, but how they worked. That struck a chord with me. But he's very much a servant leader, and he created, and he was the vision behind the institute here at UCT, the Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine, that I became the director of in 2011, and I ran for 13 years before retiring in 2023. And he demonstrated servant leadership, and watching him, I could see how one could aspire to do this. And, I think I've probably said enough about my career, shifting transitions underpinned by, or transitions across disciplines, underpinned by huge family support. And I do want to emphasize that I was surrounded by loved ones who kept saying to me, trust your own instincts. Whatever you choose to do is okay. And this started with my parents. Thanks, Tracy.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's hugely inspiring. And just to note that you did spend some time overseas, and do you think that really sort of shaped you and formed
Tracy,
you and changed your perspectives?
This was, if I were to say what was the most important thing I've done in my career, was to spend a significant postdoctoral experience abroad. Out of my comfort zone, I went I was so unconfident. I didn't know if I would make it, and I arrived, and within 3 to 6 months, I realized I could do what my lab mates who had trained at Harvard and all Yale and Princeton, all these top American universities, little me from Cape Town and Harare could do it. And I learned how to learn from other people, learned how to stand on my own 2 feet. If people have the opportunity to move, and I wasn't married at the time, I wasn't a mother at the time, that all came later. I was free enough to do it. And I look around me today and I think that the trajectory, you know, I finished my PhD at the age of 24, which is very unusual in today's world. So I think the trajectory that people are taking, it's a lot longer to finish, and postdocs are a lot longer. And I think people are potentially less mobile because of lots of other types of commitments. If you have the mobility and the opportunity, go.
Great. And then Lynn, yeah, more about your story. What inspired you, or how did you end up going down the path of research, and some of the lessons who inspired you, and more about that research path.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And thanks to you and Bailey for organizing this. Such a nice kind of format. I guess it's a bit like Desert Island Discs, but without the music, right? So, but also really delighted to be doing this with Val. As you know, Val and I have known each other, I don't know, probably 30 years or so. And just to say, Val was at Wits, so you weren't incorrect by by saying Wits, because Val built her career at Wits, actually. But just to say, I'm in awe of what Val has achieved, and I'm sure many of you will know she was made a Fellow of the Royal Society last year, which was really a pinnacle achievement. So really wonderful opportunity. I do want to also just comment on Wieland, because he's been such a kind of a looming presence, actually, in the whole kind of health medical space. And sadly, I don't have a copy of the book yet, but I definitely plan to do it. And I think he was the one that coined this award as being the Nobel Prize, which, you know, it's kind of flattering, but I think let's be realistic. I mean, it's a baby Nobel, if anything. Yeah. This is not, we're not quite
in the
at the level of
South Africa.
Yeah. But anyway, he's done such wonders for South African science, and really just, to pay tribute to him as well, and his role in these fellowships and in promoting South African science. So I guess I've always just been a very curious person. So even, you know, in high school, we'd be given a project and I'd find myself going down rabbit holes, and, you know, that hasn't changed. Something tweaks my interest, and I go and explore and investigate. So I've always been very curious. And I think, you know, that's obviously what drives, you know, research. So I think if you have that, then research is a very good career for you, because that sort of thinking is encouraged. And of course, a lot of them lead to nothing, right? So, you know, it's an environment where you can trial things and you know, fail, but learn from the failures, obviously, and move forward. So I actually did my undergraduate degrees at Wits, and then I went to Oxford to do a PhD. And while I thoroughly, you know, enjoyed you know, the process and the rigor, and, you know, at the end of my PhD, I felt a little unsatisfied, because I was working on a mouse model, and I just couldn't see the relevance, you know, to human health. So even though it was a very good training ground, and obviously my mentor, Simon Gordon, who, you know, is also a South African, who, you know, has also, you know, helped many South Africans in their careers, you know, was a brilliant mentor. I really wanted to work on something real. But that wasn't to come, because I then won a Florey Fellowship to go to Australia, where I continued to work on mice. This time it wasn't a human disease, but it was a human disease that nobody really cares about. It's called leishmania. And so I still felt dissatisfied. So even though I was working on kind of human, I really wanted to work on something where I felt I was going to have an impact. And that's when I decided to come back to South Africa and work on HIV. And, you know, that obviously was, you know, the best decision, you know, that I made in my career. And I was very fortunate to be supported for a very long time at the NICD, National Institute for Communicable Diseases, which is part of the National Health Laboratory Service, to have a research career. You know, it's a real privilege to be employed to be a researcher. And so I did that for almost 30 years, and was really a very rewarding career. I mean, along the way, lots of different mentors. You know, I guess you pick up different things from different people. You know, so you build your own, you know, identity and your own profile from what you learn from others. So it is about the people you meet and the networks. And so, Val, I absolutely agree. You know, this going overseas on a postdoc or even sabbaticals or, visits. I mean, that's what's exciting about being in this area, is that you have those kinds of opportunities because they are invigorating, and it is what stimulates new ideas and keeps you going. Because I mean, as much as it's a lovely career, it's a tough career too. And I'm sure we're going to get onto the discussion around, the cuts in US funding. You have to live in that incredibly uncertain, world. So, but
So
yeah,
what-
so
What have been some
Sorry.
of your challenges and highlights? But what are the big challenges at the different stages of your career that you've had to overcome? And then the other question I wanted to just touch on is, have you actively gone out and pursued mentors, or has it just sort of happened organically? Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting question because, I'm also part of this mentorship program where they team you up with somebody. So, mentorship, whether it's an organic thing or whether it's a structured thing, and how well that works. I guess it's a bit like arranged marriages versus, normal marriages. There's some people that say that, that both work. So I guess I've just been very lucky that I've met people that have, influenced me. And I wouldn't say I've gone out to seek mentors, but I've certainly learned from people. And I guess I gravitate towards people who are positive and who think differently and, who just enrich your life. So I think that's the process. In terms of challenges, look, as a scientist, you have to be a self-starter, right? Because you have to raise all these funding. You have to decide what projects you're going to pursue. So you do have to have a high level of drive, and you do have to stick your neck out. So even as a young scientist, going to conferences, you have to be up there asking questions. You have to be introducing yourself to people. You have to network, and that can be quite daunting in the beginning, especially as an early career person. But of course, that's how you build the confidence. So I would say establishing a presence, is a hard thing for many people to do. It is, it does require, as I say, stepping out of your comfort zone, as Val mentioned as well. And I guess I've transitioned now into this role, and there's obviously a whole different set of challenges in this role. I guess in these, when you in these kinds of roles, people look to you as if you have the answers to everything, and so sometimes that's quite tough. Is first of all acting like you do have the answers to everything, and then if you don't, being able to kind of facilitate, some solutions. So different sort of challenges. Yeah.
And what was that transition like for you, going from sort of being in research and obviously having built your reputation, etc., and then suddenly this shift and how did that come about, and how how did research set you up for that, or didn't it? And you've had to really sort of learn on the go.
Just to say, it wasn't planned, right? I didn't plan to do this. And in some ways, I guess people observe you and people recognize that you have leadership skills. Of course, I kind of knew that I had leadership skills because I do step in to solve problems. When I see that something needs to be sorted out, I will do it. And I can also remember, and maybe this is a little bit of an inside story, but I do remember sitting in, NICD management meetings thinking, why don't they do it this way? This would be a much better way of doing things. So you almost kind of self-identify, right? That you want to think bigger, you want to solve problems. And so in some ways, it does become a natural progression. Of course, I still had to be kind of coaxed into doing it, because leaving the life of being a researcher is wonderful, right? I mean, you get to set your own agenda, you determine your own time, you pursue the things you want to pursue. When you step into these kinds of leadership roles, all of that falls away. You're not in control of your time. You're at everyone's beck and call. You have to deal with all the hard problems. So it is a different set of challenges.
Tracy, can I
Yes.
pick up a couple of important points that Lynn has made? She mentioned that for about 30 years, she was supported as a researcher by the NICD and NHLS. So was I. by exactly the same organization. Mine was a little less than 30 years, but I think Lynn and I are products of a devoted, dedicated research path. We both became research professors at Wits. It's, I think, one of very few universities that have that as a dedicated research, as a dedicated academic path. And actually, when we come back later to some of the issues that we're dealing with in the current situation where we've lost a lot of international funding, what we need to think differently. I feel that, firstly, enormously privileged that we were given the opportunity to do this. But the quid pro quo is, I think, that what we have contributed more than justifies the investment that those institutions made in us because of their links to the university. So I think that's a really, really important point. The second one, where it could have been me speaking, I think we self-identify as leaders, okay? I mean, I never wanted to work for anybody. At the age of 27, 28, when I came back to South Africa, I wanted to start my own lab. Own lab. Not that I didn't want to work with others. I didn't want to be told what to do. And I think that if you've got that phenotype, you can identify it at a really young age. And I worry sometimes whether we are infantilizing early career researchers and almost protecting people too long before we let them go. The people who show leadership potential demonstrated at quite a young age. And I think part of your trick as a research leader is to spot people like that and give them wings to fly. So the transition to independence in my case was just very, very, very early. There are there's one that's popped up in the chat. Tracy, I don't know how you want to handle the questions in the chat.
I was going to let us speak, but I can't see.
No, I'm happy if we go with other questions, and then we maybe at the last 15 minutes deal with
we'll
questions
open up questions if that's okay. I just wanted to touch on, because you mentioned the US cuts, and how's that going to change the landscape of research going forward in South Africa? You know, and I mean, Lynn, I think you sort of really at the coalface of this, understanding the impact that it's having on the universities, but you know, how do we move forward? And I'm sure this is the $1 million question we're all asking ourselves. But if you could give us a little bit more color around that, because as you say, you know, when the research funding goes, it becomes harder. So what do you recommend for some of our young researchers? What does that mean for them, and what skills do they have to start building to actually manage what's happening?
So first of all, it's a rapidly changing landscape. So even just with Val and I were talking before this session, you know, over the weekend, there was an announcement made by the NIH that South Africans can now have direct awards with the NIH. That previously had been cancelled. And so it's really, it's shifting. So it's not only that it's uncertain, it's just that it's from pillar to post, because there's certainty 1 minute on something and then it gets taken away. And so it's a very tough space to be in right now. So I think it's also important to separate out the kinds of funding, because Wits has been kind of affected in a slightly different way to, for example, UCT, because Wits also had a large amount of US government funding to support clinical services, health system strengthening, sort of implementation science, in addition to the research funding. So having lost both of those, and of course the service work went first, and that's gone, and that's an existential crisis for the country, because, suddenly these clinics, these services, following up patients who are at risk of getting HIV or dropping out of the ARV programs, that's, so I should say it was all in support of the government programs. So those government programs obviously are still going, but it's the kind of nice to haves, and it's the, so sort of the, as I said, the health systems part of it. And there was a whole NGO sector that's just disappeared. And so as a country, that is something we're going to have to deal with, and I think many people know, the health department, quite frankly, has been quite slow in responding to this. So we're going to see the effects of that, at a public health level in the coming, and as soon as probably within the next 6 months. Now, on the research side, and this is where, obviously UCT, Stellenbosch, UKZN, all of the big universities that get a lot of NIH funding. So there has been a lot of cancellations, a lot of terminations. There's also been threats of terminations, but actually the bulk of the funding is actually still active, because they're waiting for these things are done annually, so they're waiting for the grants to run out. And now we're sort of getting a bit of a sign that maybe they will continue. So it's almost a tougher space to be in. Because if you know for certain it's terminated, then you can make a plan. So what we have done at WITS, obviously, I mean, one of the main things is to give people the context, to be communicative, to be transparent, and to try and assist where we can. But it is about prioritizing things. So one of the things we have prioritized is our PhD, our postgraduate students, because we have a moral obligation to them, and we certainly do not want them to, their careers to suffer. So we have prioritized them, and the university is making funding available to support them. It obviously cannot step in and solve this problem. It can give short-term emergency funding for some key academics who can keep writing grants and papers and things. But of course, what we have done, and we did this together with UCT and Stellenbosch and UKZN, is put in a big application to National Treasury to try and solve this problem. How far that's going to go, we just don't know. So at this stage, we're being supportive. We're helping our researchers as much as we can, but we're also telling them that it's a time to reprioritize, diversify funding, look for other funders. This is an uncharted space.
Yeah, if I could comment, Tracy, I'm seeing it firstly as the former director of an institute that where I was very proud of the fact that during my term we grew enormously. In fact, Lynn was on our scientific advisory board. And within the UCT environment, this institute has won the lion's share of funding from the NIH. So it's particularly painful for me to watch the hard work that we put in being so much at risk, to reinforce the message of the uncertainty. It's almost like you're on a roller coaster ride, and you will read the New York Times and in the morning, and in the afternoon something's different. So the famous South African resilience is being tested. And, I'm on record as saying during my term, we dealt with fire at UCT, day zero drought in Cape Town, governance challenges at the university, load shedding, and now this, okay? And when I talk to American colleagues, they want to know how we are staying so sane. And I do think that there's something about what we've been through. Lynn and I have worked on TB and HIV. These are the defining health problems of our time. I think that is selected for people who really know how to stare disaster in the face. Okay. And so what I've tried to do, and it's a bit frustrating because I'm no longer in a position of authority at the university as a so-called post-retiree, but what I've tried to do is to think a lot and talk a lot about the difference between hope and optimism. And these are two vital sentiments to bring into the space that we're in. Hope does not carry any baggage with it, any responsibility with it, or optimism, excuse me, is quite bland. We can all be optimistic, and you can go home and actually wring your hands and say, I'm really scared. Hope, on the other hand, carries with it an enormous responsibility of courage. And so I think what we're trying to do, senior people in the system, is really show a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding to the people who I think are most adversely affected, students, postdocs, early and mid-career researchers. I don't need more papers or new grants in my life. I've had a very successful career. It's the people who've got 20, 30 years ahead of them who need this kind of support. And I have been, quite frankly, amazed and so proud to see the level of solidarity that's existing in the health research sector. Firstly, that the universities are working together, sharing information, sharing approaches. This is unprecedented because we're set up to compete with each other. And yet, as Lynn knows, she played a big role in this as the director of the NICD. During COVID, we learned how to put our differences aside and work together. And I love this because I've spent so much time both at WITS and at UCT and built a center of excellence with Stellenbosch and worked in UKZN. So for me, seeing this this way we are supporting each other has been amazing. And to see at the level of individual research groups, people saying, I can share, I've got some discretionary funding. What can I do to help you? So it's been a remarkable story in the last few months. I think I want to point out something a little different, and that is what it's made me realize about the relationship we've got with our American colleagues. My research career has been enabled from the beginning by collaboration with great Americans. People at all kinds of institutions within the NIH and outside of the NIH. 35 years of research collaboration cannot be tossed aside. It is foundational to who we are. And finding a way, just tomorrow afternoon, we've got collaboration and discussion of what our next steps should be in the face of all these changes with my US colleagues. Nothing can get in the way of that. However, with respect to the system as a whole, there's been an erosion in trust. Okay. And as Lynn pointed out, it's often better to know if a grant's been cancelled, at least you know where you stand. This space that we're in my own case, I'm sitting in year 5 of an NIH sub-award with colleagues at Cornell and Harvard. Year 4 ended in April. We've received no funding yet. And we don't know if we're going to get funding for year 5. And part of tomorrow's discussion is, what are we going to do? Should we cancel this grant? Should we give it back to Americans? So we're being put into situations that are awkward, are difficult, but actually giving us the opportunity to really talk to our American colleagues and dig deep into our own, what I call the special South African resilience. Okay, so it's been the hardest of times, best of times, and the worst of times, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. Before we move into questions, I was going to ask you one quick question. What is the one thing you want people to remember about you? It's to both of you.
Can I start?
Go ahead.
I'm an unashamed basic scientist. Okay. I have spent my entire career in South Africa fighting for the role of basic science in biomedicine. Okay. And in this way, my path has been a little different than Lynn. Okay. I have not just valued, but celebrated the role of asking and addressing fundamental questions in basic science. Because without basic science, I say with the greatest respect and humility that our clinical research, for which South Africa is famous, okay, in infectious disease, would not be nearly as good as it is without the basic science. So I would like to be remembered as a person who flew the flag for basic science at a time in which we really have to think very carefully about how we use government funding. Because I do understand the rationale for working only in areas of research where you can save lives with immediacy. Okay. My research has a much longer time frame, much longer horizon. So for me, that would be it. Okay.
Great. And you, Lynn?
Well, same with me. I want to be remembered as a scientist. Because I've spent most of my career being a scientist, I mean, even though I'm now some call me a bureaucrat, I still think and I act like a scientist. And I think that's what's important, that in these leadership roles in academic institutions, that you continue to, to act and think like a scientist, because that's who you're servicing, So it's, obviously I do have to follow policies and procedures, and I do, but I also am aware that these things are not immovable, right? And so, in fact, that's part of my role, is also to help people navigate some of these things, because we want these environments to be enabling. And so, yeah, so I think having scientists and academics transition into these, leadership roles is very, very important, for the future of higher education.
Absolutely. It makes sense that you've walked that road. So how do you help people navigate it in a smoother way? So I want to open questions up to the floor. I don't know if anybody wants to put their camera on and ask, or whether you want me to read comments out of the chat.
I think the first one was for Val.
I see one.
Okay, yes.
His hand up.
Yeah.
Wandile.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to you, Lynn and Valeria, for your wonderful presentations. Yeah, my first question is directed to Valeria. You mentioned that you finished your PhD at the age of 24. And I was just wondering, as someone who's doing his PhD at the age of 26, almost done with it, I often get asked the question of whether I don't think I'm too young to be a specialist in my field. At first, I thought it was a joke, but I've realized that it's a question that I get a lot, even from potential employers. They're very interested to hear why have I decided to pursue a PhD at such a very young age. So I just wanted to hear, what are your experiences around that? And then for Leanne, you just spoke about the role of funding and how important it is, and you mentioned the big universities and how they already have some funding opportunities. And I was just wondering whether during your time when you're pursuing your own studies, has it always been a huge consideration to check who the funder is? I assume it is, but has it been a very fundamental consideration for scholarship to check who the funder is and what their objectives are, and to check whether that aligns with your own research? And I'm asking this as someone who works in the environmental law sector, so I consistently have to check what is the positionality of people who are funding my PhD when it comes to climate change, when it comes to environmental injustices. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So thanks very much for your very thoughtful questions. I never considered myself a specialist when I finished my PhD. In fact, I switched fields completely. I went into a field that I knew nothing about. So I started again as a postdoc. I came back to South Africa. I started again. So I don't think, my late father used to say to me, what are you going to be when you grow up? Okay. When are you going to figure out what it is you want to do? So I don't think that it's a good idea to consider yourself a specialist at an early stage. I just think that you've got to be open to absorbing lots of different things from new fields. I'm just reading a little bit about your background here, going into environmental law, which is your field. I do think that you probably would do really well to learn and to expose yourself to different fields and advances in different fields that impinge on your own career. So don't pigeonhole yourself too soon. And I get annoyed when people talk about, I'm training PhD students. You don't train a PhD student, you educate a PhD student. There's a very big difference. So consider yourself in the process of being educated, and educated as broadly as you possibly can be. And then eventually you'll find one thing. I actually discovered my passion for tuberculosis research must have been at least 7 or 8 years after I finished my PhD. And that's been a field that I've remained in some shape or form for the rest of my career. Hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Great, and maybe I'll tackle the one on funding. So, this is a very important question. And so from an institutional point of view, we do have policies on, who we accept funding from, and it does need to align with your values, right? So we don't take funding from military organizations or tobacco companies, or so there are those kinds of rules. But I think what's more important is when the the conditions of, because any funder, of course, as part of their contract, could put conditions in the grant. And if any of those conditions don't align with our values, we also wouldn't accept the funding. So often one of the most contentious things, you know, is the intellectual property on grants. And, you know, and sometimes some particularly commercial organizations are particularly aggressive around IP issues. And that sometimes becomes a little bit of a sticking point. But certainly when you're negotiating those sorts of contracts, there's an opportunity to make sure that, you know, that the funding is aligned with what your ideals, your principles, and also what you want to achieve. Obviously, on a personal level, you know, you accepting a bursary, the same would apply. You'd have to be comfortable with what the conditions of the award are.
Great. Should we move over to Ataret? Ataret Ben
Hi.
David. Hi. And then I'll come back
Hi
to the
there.
comments.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you both for sharing your stories. It was truly inspiring. I've taken a slightly different path. I've got 4 kids. I'm 30. I'm finishing off my PhD. And I wanted to know how becoming a mother has influenced your path and your career. I haven't seen that modeled enough in science, and it's very daunting for me.
I'll leave that
Happy-
to Val.
happy to answer that. So welcome to the club, okay? I'm a mother of 2 proud daughters who are grown women today, okay? And yeah, when Tracy sent us the questions, the list of what we might discuss, one of the questions was what's been most challenging. I do think that striking that balance of being a mom and wanting to be as good a mom as my mother was for me and my sister, and I don't think that I even came close, actually. And trying to build a research career, and it's really, anybody who says it's easy has not walked this path, okay? Because on a daily basis, you're going to be asked to make decisions, and something has to be compromised. So for me, I think learning that nothing at work was ever going to be as important as raising my children was number one. I made it my business never to miss a swimming gala or a piano recital. Travel, however, was really challenging. I could only do this because of my mother, and who just stepped in. And she is just, to this day, I'm blessed with a 90-year-old mom who is as engaged today in looking after me. And I go to Joburg often, where she lives, and she gives me inspiration and she gives me hope. But this is just not easy. But the notion that you can do everything, I think that the world of working women has really brought into sharp relief the challenges. And it's not so easy to do everything, and to do everything to the kind of level of perfection that we're often asked to do. I mean, there's so many things that I remember that I did when I was at WITS and the South African Institute for Medical Research. I would basically say, I'm not going to attend a meeting after 4:00 in the afternoon, because I needed to go home. And I think I modeled, and I could do that because I ran my own lab, I could model a behavior that many of the women who've trained with me over the years have subsequently taken on, okay? You have to set real boundaries on your time in research. But you know, to this day, my one daughter is 33 years old today, says to me, Mom, there were times when you weren't present. You were physically there, but I know your mind was wandering. Well, hello, this is what we do as researchers, right? I was thinking science a lot of the time instead of actually getting absorbed in the book of Harry Potter that I was reading to them. So there are challenges, there are difficulties, but I would never, ever want my life to be any different. I think what paid the price in my case was my marriage. We landed up divorcing, and which was difficult, but you know, what we share are 2 children, and who are, as I said, grown women today. And yeah, I wish you strength. 30 with 4 kids, that's really, really tough. Good luck. And if you ever want to talk, my email address, maybe Tracy, you can share. I spend a lot of my time mentoring young women researchers who have got small children, and some with even bigger children. There's a huge need for that kind of support.
Lynn, could you pick
Thank
up?
you so much.
Sorry, Lynn, could you pick up the question in the comments from Michael? He was asking what your experience and opinions are on upgrading a project from a master's to a PhD.
Yeah, look, it depends which university you're at, obviously, because there are some rules around this. Certainly at Wits, you have to have published something before you can upgrade. And because that's a sign that the work is, novel and, it's worthy of, of taking it further. So it's really, it'll depend. You need to check with your institution. But what I would say is also be guided by your supervisor, because your supervisor will know what potential the project has for a PhD, because a PhD is a quantum leap. A master's is a nicely controlled project. A PhD, you're out there in the unknown. And of course, the danger of upgrading is that you might not then, or you might just still end up with the master's. Whereas if you get the master's and then do the PhD, you're sort of starting a PhD knowing for sure the master's is in the bank. So it's a case by case thing. It depends on the project, the supervisor, the funding, and it also depends on you. Is it what would be your reasons for wanting to do it? If it's to get around writing a master's thesis, that's that might not be a good enough reason. And again, actually, as Val said, if you want to have an offline discussion about it, very happy to have a chat.
Thanks.
Perhaps I'd like to add that it's really important to think, what are you doing? And keep asking yourself the question, why are you doing this postgraduate study? What do you really see yourself doing after either a master's or a PhD? And I want to really echo one important point. Speak to your supervisor about this. I think the people who work closely with you and who have had at least some track record of developing other young people and supervising other postgraduate students often have a very nuanced sense about what your own strengths and weaknesses are. And I really encourage people to go out there and just test the waters. Ask people, what do you think? Yeah. Where do you see yourselves? A PhD is a serious journey. It takes a big financial toll on a family. The write-up, to do it properly it's a really big deal. I know some fields obviously more challenging than others. So I want to really encourage, if you have an opportunity to write and get a master's in your back pocket, I think it's probably a good thing to do. I leapfrogged through in my own case. I bypassed a master's completely. I think it's quite risky because sometimes a PhD doesn't work out. And then where are you sitting? But take advice. One of the things that Lynn and I haven't mentioned that I think is a really important criterion for being a researcher, you are putting yourself and your ideas out there on a daily basis. This means you have to be able to take criticism. And your ideas are being criticized, not you as a person. And one of the things I do when I talk on these research leadership programs that we've got at the university and elsewhere is to really emphasize the need to separate your own success and your being as a person from what your latest successes or failures are at work. Those are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. You're putting your ideas out. And your ideas need to be critiqued. So I hope that all of you who are on the line, because you're obviously a select group who've come through the OMT support system, I hope you're having a regular opportunity to put your ideas out, to be critiqued by your peers, by other faculty members. If you've had an opportunity to go to a conference and you've stood up with a poster. I'm an introvert. This is hard for me to do to this day. Okay. People look at me and say, oh, you're so confident. I'm an introvert. These are not easy things to do, go to conferences and interact with people all the time. But it's your ideas that are being critiqued. It's not you, the person. And I urge you to separate those two things out, because research, the path of a researcher, is fraught with failure. I'm sure Lynn has got her own stories of failure, but mine are just legendary. I mean, I was the first person selected by the Wellcome Trust for the very first competition of a Wellcome Trust Senior Fellowship, and I failed on my backside. Okay. I was terrible. I was too confident. I was too arrogant. And it was a really important learning lesson. But it was my ideas that failed, not me. Okay. So
Brilliant.
just remember that importance of separating those two things out.
I'm going to move across to Masala Mugeri, who's online, and then we'll go back to the comments.
Thank you. This is very wonderful for us students. My question is going back to moving from finishing PhD and starting a new field in postdoc, especially overseas, because I'm also being educated by my supervisor who is retiring, meaning that my postdoc will be in a new field of study, then I have to start over, and it's quite scary for me. So I want to know, when you prepare the application, how do you motivate them into this new field of study that, okay, I want to do postdoc in your lab, and my PhD was totally different, maybe from your research. How do you motivate them to take you? Or there's always a question about your career goals in the next 5 years. Sometimes it feels like you're confused because you keep changing things. You don't even know where you stand. So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, maybe I'll start by saying, that you need to be sure what you want to do. And you do that by reading, by researching, by coming up with your own ideas. And so you almost need to sell yourself to this new postdoc mentor rather than the other way around, right? So you need to be absolutely sure that this is what you want to do. Because changing fields is it's a big step. And not everybody can do it. And it might be better for you to rather find somebody who's more aligned to what you're currently doing, but to try and branch out into a whole new field could be quite difficult.
Yeah, I would emphasize that point. I think moving direction, I think, is really essential for a successful career in research. You've got to be able to be adaptable and flexible to move direction. Moving field, like what I did several times in my career, you pay a big price, and because you're not known. But at the stage that you're at, you do need to sell yourself, and you need to demonstrate in the letter of application that you've been well educated. Okay. And by that, I mean, you know how to read literature. You have got good critical thinking skills. You know how to write. You know how to communicate. Whether it's on topic A or topic B actually should be irrelevant. You've got a skill set. You know how to do certain things in your field. You're familiar with the kind of current group of methodologies that are applicable to your field. And this I consider to be really quite generic. It takes a brave step to move as overseas, number one, to a foreign country where you are going to be surrounded by people who've had vastly different educational experiences. In the US, for instance, they will do a 4-year liberal arts qualification before specializing. So they're generally quite a lot older than you, typically. So think very, very carefully about whether that's what you want to do. And it does concern me when you say that because your supervisor is retiring, you need to shift field. There must be other people working in that field, even overseas. Perhaps explore them first if you are convinced that that's the field that you want to stay in. How passionate are you about your field? And so I would push that question back to you, perhaps. But perhaps we should give more time to other people who've asked questions. I see Leah has her hand up.
Yeah, and then there's one from okay, let's go with Leah, and then we'll move back to the comments.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks both for sharing your stories. I really am enjoying this kind of engagement, especially, within the South African context. I just had a question on the sort of translatability to industry. I've had some experience working in biotech in Cape Town, and I studied in Stellenbosch prior to that. And I think, yeah, I just feel like as an early career professional, there is kind of a lack of networks out there to get mentorship. And I'm wondering, in your experience within academia, if this is a topic that's discussed a lot, and kind of if there are things that I'm not aware of out there, or if there's kind of an opportunity to start something. So I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Val.
Okay, so
Cape Town question.
terrific question. I think as academics who are your supervisors, we try to reproduce ourselves. Okay, this is like the top thing. You want to say so many people that I've trained became professors, became senior lecturers. I have dramatically shifted my thinking over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, because most people who do PhDs are not going to land up as independent investigators, researchers, or academics in universities. Most of you are going to go into industry, you're going to go to the private sector. Hopefully some of you are going to go into government and into the health sector and into all kinds of different fields. I think that we don't do nearly enough in terms of exposing our trainees or PhDs and master's graduates, master's students into the variety, the panoply of career opportunities that are out there. And so in the institute that I'm in, and led, we tried to start doing this, and I'm delighted to see that that the new director, who actually did his PhD with me 25 years ago, has taken this on really seriously, and now we're doing quite a lot of career advice, bringing people in to show them about what the career opportunities are that are out there. I think that the first message I would convey is that we tend to perhaps overvalue the academic career at the expense of others. And I think we're doing this a great disservice to the people who are studying at our universities. As far as I'm concerned, success is that you're a critical thinker and that you know how to go and exercise your scientific thinking, which Lynn made a really important point. What do we want to be remembered by? We're remembered as scientists, okay? Not a particular piece of research that we did, although I'm sure we've each got our own ideas of the pieces of research that we like. But bring your scientific thinking into the biotech sector. So I would urge you, and certainly here in Cape Town, which I think at least in the biotechnology space is probably more active than elsewhere in the country. There are lots of people for you to talk to. Again, feel free to contact me after this webinar and I can link you up with people who have been there and done that, okay, between Stellenbosch and UCT. Great question, okay.
We've
Thank
got
you.
2 questions left and we've got 5 minutes. So I'm going to ask Lynn to pick up Jesmica's question in the chat box.
So that was about breast cancer research and wanting to be involved, not necessarily in research, I guess, but outside of academia. I mean, of course, if you want to stay in research, you could go to biotech. I mean, there's a lot of cancer research going on in biotech companies, or even, you know, some of our science councils, which is sort of quasi-academia, because they're much more kind of focused on the commercial application. So I guess it depends what kind of research you want to do. But if you want to be totally outside of research, you know, there are lots of ways of getting involved with, you know, there's Cancer South Africa. There's lots of organizations that provide support, care, and help for people with cancer that you could just look up on the web. So I think there's lots of opportunities to get involved in different ways. And then maybe I'll just quickly also address the last question about about the anxiety of publishing or perishing. Look, we all have that anxiety. You're not alone. So, and it is a process. You know, when I think about my own publishing career, you know, I started off and you target, you know, kind of, you know, journals that are maybe local journals. And then, you know, you build up over time. You know, you don't get to publish in Nature on your first paper. You know, you have to build up the skills actually to write good papers, and you have to obviously have a good research portfolio, you know, to be publishing. But so I think for you at your stage of your career, sounds like you've just finished your PhD and you're now expected to do research. The important thing, find good collaborators, because once you've got a network, you've got people, you're talking the same language, you help each other, it's fun, you come up with new ideas. So get yourself some good collaborators and be a good collaborator. You know, I always say to people, always give more than you expect to receive, and you'll be a good collaborator. And then also, you know, have smart students, because that also keeps the research going. So it is daunting. And this publish or perish thing, we do have to publish because we have to tell people what we're doing. And that's what publishing is. It's communication. You have to tell people how you've gone about your research, how you've spent the money essentially, and you want to share it. You want other people to pick up on your research and take it to the next level. So don't be anxious, just get on with it.
There's a moral obligation to publish. If you've taken money from the South African Medical Research Council or the NRF, this is taxpayers' money, okay? We have to communicate what we've done with it. Start small. You can publish in good local journals. There's lots of good local journals. There's lots of open access journals to put your work out there. Let's do some crowd reviewing. I mean, even at this late stage of my career, we published in Gates Open recently, a couple of years ago, and then eventually it landed up being peer reviewed. There are many more avenues for publication today than you will ever imagine. Keep your eyes and ears open, and anxiety, a certain amount of anxiety about publication comes with the territory, okay? But there's no greater thrill than seeing your papers being accepted, okay? So enjoy that, right? Science is fun, guys, okay? Being a researcher and a scholar is fun, okay? And that's what I would suppose would be my last message to you. Enjoy. We are privileged to be able to use our minds to think on a daily basis. And someone paid me to do that for my career. Fantastic.
Any last comments from you, Lynn?
No, just to say as well, it's a very enriching and rewarding career. Of course, it's not always for everybody, but I guess everyone on this call has bought into the idea. So keep at it. I mean, you do need resilience, perseverance, all those good things, but it's a very rewarding career.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And we'll let you know when our next session is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
Tracy and Bailey. And
Thanks,
thanks everyone for
Valerie.
joining.
Thanks,
So
Lynn.
just to
Thanks,
say,
Lynn. Thanks,
Paul,
all.
so willing to share your contacts and your experiences. I think it's really special, and lots of people saying that as well. So if you are happy for me to share your contact, I will
Absolutely.
do that with the questions. All right, great.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Stay
We really
warm.
appreciate it.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye.